Hello,
LFG.
everybody. So I'm here with NiceMemeFriar, and he wanted to come on to talk about Arab military effectiveness. And he's a bit more knowledgeable about some things, like I think the Iran-Iraq War, than I am. So we're just gonna talk about it. Um, I'm sure people know who you are, but if you just want to quickly introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Argent's Indian friend, and I I've been slack with my Isildur Shack podcast because I've been busy with grad school, and I've also been having some recurrent health issues. But I have a lot of content lined up, so just
Could
just
you
need to
turn
get
down your
recording.
sensitivity, or
Okay.
just because you're cutting off a little bit?
Okay, so all right, let's see. Voice and video.
Only the most
Okay.
professional audio engineering. Rain
Yeah.
jumped on my computer, posed to strike down and kill my enemies, so she's just kind of staring at me, going, "What the hell is wrong with you and your audio
Is
production?"
this is this better?
Yeah, that's much better. Okay, so people
Okay,
just let
great.
me know because people sometimes have trouble hearing you, so
Okay,
I'm
great.
relying on you, chat. So, what I kind of wanted to start off talking about is so Arab armies suck in the modern era. I think we can all agree with
Yep.
that. But
We can all agree on that.
but they
We can
did
all
have a
agree on that. I
lot
mean
of
there.
success. I mean, the Umayyad Caliphate was massive. So I
That's right.
I think a lot of people are somewhat confused by that. Like, why were they so good early on, but then they completely sucked later?
I mean the Umayyad Caliphate at its greatest extent covered about, I don't know, over 4 million square miles. That's huge. That's huge. So
And then people will say, okay, well, you had that, and you had I mean, some of that was more impressive than others, but
yeah,
they did manage to beat two superpowers, overrun most of Like they did conquer a lot of stuff in just over 100
that's
years.
true. That's true. They conquered. Well, they basically started off from the Arabian Peninsula, and then they moved north, and they moved north and west as well as east. They conquered a lot of the eastern and southern Mediterranean littoral areas, the regions around the Red Sea and
Yeah, I'm just looking at what
North
the
Africa.
Rashidun Caliphate conquered. So yeah, so in the
Yeah.
first like 30 years, they conquered pretty much the entire Sassanid Empire, the
Mhm.
Caucasus, basically the Middle East, and North Africa up to Libya. So
Yeah.
I guess when people just look at that and they go, "What happened? Why do they suck so much now?" Now, my take is I think part of it is due to they had probably, in my opinion, one of the top five greatest military commanders of all time, Ibn Alid. Ibn Alid, or how do you pronounce his name? I don't remember, but
Yeah.
I don't know where you would list him, but I would put him really, really high in the list of greatest
Mm,
military commanders of all time. And I
yeah.
think they just got extremely lucky with when they showed up. So
That's right. Yeah.
why don't you give your take?
Um. So when they showed up, right?
Hmm.
They again. I'm not very knowledgeable about the military aspects of this, but you have to keep in mind that that the Persians and the Byzantines had been fighting each other. They'd been fighting a very long war of attrition for the past several hundred years, and they were pretty much exhausted. So when um when the new Umayyad, the Rashidun Caliphates came north, they didn't really have that much of have that much in the way of strategic reserves to reconquer and resettle. That is I think the primary reason. They were very exhausted after a lot
Because
of
there had been the plague.
yeah.
I forget when the plague of Justinian happened.
um so
Okay, so that was about
so
100 years prior.
yeah, so the thing is, right, when the Muslims invaded the um the Sassanid Empire, they managed to they managed to do a lot of damage in a very short period of time. Now, they in the first 4 months, I think, um, they got so which was 666 633, I think,
Hmm.
um, under uh, Khalid ibn al-Walid, I think,
Hmm.
unless I'm mistaken. Um, they Khalid had a very fast-moving army of about 18,000, and a lot of the tribal chiefs on his way into the borders of the Sassanid Empire joined him. And when he crossed the borders of the Sassanid Empire and entered Mesopotamia, he sent messages to governors and the deputies, the satraps who ruled the provinces. Now they said that we are the messengers of Allah, and we come in His name. Now, all Persian satraps, please submit and become Muslims, or we will destroy you.
Hmm.
Right
Right.
now, none of the satraps responded. So what happened was, Khalid, um, he immediately went on the offensive and had four very impressive strategic victories. Right
Right.
um, now now the it was surprising. It was surprising because at that time in 633 was late spring, early summer, so
Yeah, I have some
April,
of these
May.
up on screen. I'm just looking at some of them. Like, it appears he was outnumbered about 2 to 1 in every battle, and the casualties were like
No,
five.
not in the first one, not in the first one. um Not in the first one, uh, because he had about um so according to
Uh,
this
are you
Al
talking about the Battle
Akram
of
book
Chains?
I'm reading. Yeah. So
Okay, no, that was about
according to
even.
this, yeah, according to the Al Akram book I'm reading, they had about there are about 18,000 versus 20,000 Sassanid and uh, Christian auxiliary troops.
Hmm.
Um, now now think think we get the figures from Al-Tabari's history of the early caliphate, the Russian caliphate. Now, I think we would see similar we would see similar things happening, that the cataphracts, the Persian cataphracts, the heavy cavalry, they would be they would be enveloped and flanked by the swift moving, lightly clad, sometimes camel riding,
Could you see if
though
you could, sorry, if you
mostly
could turn
camel
down
riding.
your sensitivity or just switch to continuous? Just you are still cutting out a bit.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll just. Okay, how do I switch to continuous?
It should be under user settings, voice and video. Just
Okay, there we
continuous
go. Okay,
transmission.
is this good?
Yes, that's better. I think so. We'll see.
Okay,
You just
yeah.
talk kind of quietly,
Um.
and it seems to cut you off in Discord. Um,
Okay. So,
yeah, that's
yeah.
much better.
So, uh, the swift moving Muslim armies repeatedly outflanked the the heavier Sassanid soldiers. This happened in the Battle of Chains, the Battle of the River, the Battle of Walaja, the Battle of Ulais. Now they conquered a lot of the cities, and by December of that year, they had pretty much finished conquering Mesopotamia. Now, that's very impressive when you think about it. However, were there earlier victories repeated, and on such a scale, and on such a scale as b- b- so basically what I'm trying to say is, I'm sorry, you have a phone ringing in the background, and that just caused me to lose my concentration. But I guess what I'm saying is that, do we see uh, successes like these lightning fast maneuvers and conquests and pacifications, funnily enough, um, that were by and large peaceful, because I don't think they exterminated many populations. Um, do we do we see that repeated later on? We
Post
don't. In
Rashidun,
fact,
no.
no.
Because the Rashidun
In
made
fact,
basically conquered all the hard to conquer areas.
yeah. In fact, a super funny thing is, w- when Baghdad was conquered by the Mongols in the 13th century, I think, was it 1256? Uh, Probably 1256 or something. You know what? Let me look it up.
Yeah, because I mean,
Conquest
if you
of
look at a
Baghdad.
map of the Rashidun Caliphate, that's pretty much when they made all the conquests against the
Yeah, 12,
Byzantines and
12.
Persians. And then the
Yeah,
further conquests of the Byzantines were um, made by the Turks or other
yeah.
successor powers. The Arabs, I think, just basically got beaten back after that. I'm not sure if they ever really won another. Or
No,
when did
they did
Massacre
not.
happen? Was that under the Rashidun or
Manzikert, mm, no, Manzikert happened like 1058 or some 1057. Let's see, Manzikert.
because my general, just from having read a number of
Yeah,
things about,
1071. 1071.
oh, that was
So
against the Turks. Okay, that the Arabs weren't involved with that. Okay,
yeah, that was against the Seljuks. Now, finally enough, when the Abbasid Caliphate was BTFO'd by Hulagu Khan and the Ilkhanate, uh, the Mongols in 1258, Baghdad was conquered, and the reverses that the Abbasids experienced at the hands of the Mongols, that followed pretty much the same pattern as the Abbasids' ancestors. The successes that the Abbasids' ancestors experienced against the more sedentary peoples of Mesopotamia, and the Byzantine Empire and the Sassanid Empire. So it was basically fast-moving cavalry that could that could sustain strategic operations in the field. They got around um, they they got around they were able to cover long distances very quickly, and because they weren't farmers, right?
Hmm.
And because like most of their population was, you know, on the horses. They didn't have farms to go back to, nor did they have um, harvest seasons for which the levies, the conscripts, had to be released for, right?
Hmm.
They they were able they were able to sustain operations on a much larger scale and on a much longer term than the more settled, the more sedentary peoples,
Right. So
right?
to maybe just take a step back. So I think what happened was what you're saying is the Arabs initially kind of had the same advantage that the Mongols and other nomads had over
Yes,
sedentary peoples. And
yes,
then once they
yes.
became a sedentary people, they lost that and they weren't able to really
It's
adapt
pretty
to.
much it's pretty much the exact same advantage that the Turks had when mm, they invaded India,
But
or like
unlike where the
Afghans
Turks
had
were able
in
to
Indonesia.
adapt to modern warfare with like guns and disciplined infantry and stuff, the Arabs were never
Yeah,
able to do that. The other thing is, from my understanding, the Byzantines never really had a problem with their military being incompetent. It was just because they never had primogeniture. It was a constant shit show. Um,
yes. That's the that's one of the problems with the
because I was
Byzantines.
trying to read I read the Alexiad at one point. It was literally, I
Uh-huh.
think, like 5 or 6 coups in the first like 2 chapters.
Yeah,
Wasn't that an
yeah.
issue during a lot of the battles against like? Wasn't there a problem with when they were fighting the Arabs with
There was a
traitors or something?
problem. There was a problem with treachery. Okay,
Did
there
that
was a problem
happen
with
during the
treachery.
battles where they lost Syria and stuff?
That may have happened again. Um, medieval Middle Eastern, Near Eastern, Middle Eastern history isn't exactly my strong suit, but I would not be surprised at all if that's what happened.
Mm-hmm. So,
So
yeah.
I mean, I guess the more important question is, um see I I mean, you can understand the effects of a sedentary um farming agrarian lifestyle on cavalry warfare, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, how do you think that would translate, or can we draw a connection or any sort of a logical descent from those issues to modern Arab incompetence. Like, do you think s- because because the Americans, the Russians, like everyone's agricultural now. Some of them turn out fantastic warriors, others just don't. Um, so how do you think that would work out? Like, what's the reason for that, you think?
Um. Okay. So sorry. Just to kind of maintain some structure for the people watching this. Okay. So just
Yeah,
to kind of finish that off, the Arabs initially had the advantage. It was during a time period before technology was really decisive. And I think that was kind of what made it so that nomads were finally getting their asses kicked by sedentary peoples once you started to have guns. Because they would
yeah,
just saw down cavalry formations. And the Arabs were initially able to be successful because they had that inherent advantage nomads had. But once they became sedentary, they were completely incapable of adapting to infantry tactics or any of that kind of thing. And their initial expansion, I think, was to a large extent, and we briefly touched on this. The Iranians had, or the Sassanids had been completely devastated. The Byzantines were completely devastated. Um, the Justinian's conquest had basically destroyed the Western Mediterranean and the various barbarian kingdoms there. So they were all pretty much just very easy picking for a relatively
yes,
disciplined and aggressive army.
yes.
So when we kind of get into modern day, did the Arabs ever establish a agricultural civilization?
Yeah, yes. Just look at Egypt. Just look at Iraq.
Right. Okay. Yeah,
Um,
that's true. I was thinking, yeah, but
yeah,
then
yeah.
there's
I mean, you can't really farm in the empty quarter of the Arabian Peninsula because you just can't because there's nothing but sand there. So not in let's say Saudi Arabia or Kuwait even or the UAE, um but in most of the other
Muslim countries.
yeah,
Like I
you
think
do
some
have
of
like
Syria
all
you
long
can
traditions
farm
of
in, and
culture.
some of Jordan. Obviously, a lot of
Yes,
Egypt and Iraq you can.
yeah.
But yeah, they just okay. So that had happened. I was thinking about it really post Abbasids. I don't know the Arabs really did that much in the way of independent military.
No, I don't
Uh,
think they did.
I like because I'm trying to think of an Arab state or an Arab dominated state that really did much. Like in the book I read about the Ottoman Empire, the Arab provinces were kind of these sleepy backward areas
Yeah, yeah,
that were
that's
had
fair.
little population and were largely held on to because it was very prestigious to hold all the holy cities of Islam.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, like
Mm,
the you can say a lot of things about the Ottomans. You can't really say that they were militarily incompetent, at least not
no,
until
they
the
were
very
not.
end. Like they adapted very quickly to what was then modern warfare. The Mughals also did, and the
Yes, but then the Mughals were about as Turkish as they were Mongol, so they didn't have all that much of Arab blood in them.
no, but I'm just saying in terms of like Muslim powers.
Yes, yes, yeah, yeah, yeah,
From that
yeah.
same general region. I get the Mughals are in
Yeah.
India, but Pakistan was part of some of the caliphates. So,
Uh-huh.
uh,
Yeah, that's true.
so that kind of brings us to why they're so bad. And it's interesting because, like, when you look at the Toyota War or Angola or something like that, sub-Saharan Africans, despite having like a much lower IQ are much more militarily competent. And it's not just in
Yeah.
terms of like berserker mode. Like when I was reading about the Toyota War, they would do scouting, which Arabs can't do. They would
Mhm.
attack weak points in the lines, like they would do probing. They would
Yeah.
plan multi front attacks. And I mean, I don't know if we've ever really seen Arab armies do stuff like that. And it seems like pretty basic tactics, but it was very effective. Um,
I remember reading. I remember reading this well a couple of Israeli military historians. There's Michael Oren and there's Martin van Greveld. Now, when I was reading about what they thought about the reason why they were so incompetent, they said that when shiny new French or Soviet equipment came in during the 50s and the
yeah.
60s, the culture of prestige and of access to new equipment that led the junior officers and the non-commissioned officers to not let the rank and file get too um too they didn't really want to let their men get too familiar
They
with
didn't
the
want
new
the plebs
machines.
to learn how to use the new machines. The book
Yes.
I read
So
says part of that is they're just not really able to maintain anything. Like that's a massive issue. Um,
that's 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 another thing, right? So when I was listening to your Toyota War stream, um, you you were talking of battles they in which the Libyans lost like 90 tanks or like 75
mhm.
APC. Um, now, what I suspect is that those tanks and APCs were not destroyed so much as they were abandoned in the field. Um,
Yeah, because what the
because,
book
because
says is basically, I don't know, because I'm kind of wonder if we're talking about this from like an edgy perspective, how much of it is that there's just a lot of IQ. Um, I'm trying to think of it. Uneven IQ distribution, so they're just very dependent upon the smarter
right,
people.
yeah,
So,
right.
so
I mean,
like,
that's yeah. That is almost definitely possible because you did see that um you did see that in Storm, like shortly before and during the Battle of 73 Easting, right?
mhm.
Um, the Iraqi People's Army, which was not part of the uh, elite Republican Guard, um, and not they weren't professional. They were short-term conscripts, right? You had them surrendering by the battalion, by the brigade, even.
I mean,
Now,
and the Republican guards suck too, but not as much. But sorry, just to get back to
not
the
as not as yeah, not as much. So,
sorry,
um,
just I want to finish the previous point. So,
yeah,
an
go
issue
on.
they tend to have in the American army and in most armies like the Russian army, the crews of weapons or tanks are trained to at least do basic repairs and basic maintenance. Like if
Yeah,
something simple breaks down, they can fix it in the field. I don't know if they have spare parts or whatever. I know if you look at like World War II tanks, they have parts of track in case their track gets blown out or something.
yeah, yeah,
Arab armies have central depots for everything, including like guns. So there's this like elaborate supply system where if anything develops like any problems, it has to be
Mhm.
sent to a central location. So a lot of
Yeah,
this stuff just breaks and they have to abandon it and blow it
there's
up.
just there's not enough. There's just not enough mobility. Yeah, um, because as we know, this is a perennial problem with mechanized warfare. Can the logistics column keep up with the combat column?
The interesting
In,
thing that the book says is that in terms of
in
basic
like
log
60% of in in like 60% of the cases historically, supply columns had a very hard time keeping up with the combat formations. But yeah, please go on.
the book states that the Arabs are actually pretty good at getting logistics for stuff like food, fuel, ammunition, like actually getting supplies to the side, to the front lines. Anything that's like technical, they can't do. But generally speaking, their quartermaster system isn't bad. I don't think any of their armies have really failed because they didn't have food or fuel or bullets or stuff like that. Um, which is kind of interesting because it's not like a uniform problem. It just seems that I don't know if this is like an IQ thing or this is a cultural thing, but they
This
just
is this is this is probably a cultural thing because oh, I think another thing, right? Again, to go back to the example of the Toyota War, I believe that technicals and Dushka 14.5 millimeter heavy machine guns and um, RPG-7 rocket launchers are much simpler to maintain and to operate than T-62 or T-72
now to
tanks
be
are.
slightly fair to the Libyans, the French did provide all the maintenance during the Toyota War, and there was issues where the Chads couldn't maintain like trucks, which you'd think would be easy. Like you'd think a lot of like I'm sure in Western countries a lot of just normal people probably know how to fix basic problems with
Yeah,
cars.
yeah, but see, there's not an you can build an RPG-7, or at the very least you can put one together, you can assemble one in your backyard shed, right? Same with uh, uh, um like submachine guns, like super simple submachine guns. However, and as I said, it's pretty similar. It's pretty simple to bolt on um, pieces of sheet metal on the doors of your Toyota, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, tanks and APCs, they're much more difficult to maintain, and spare parts are a constant problem. Um, uh, and that lengthened the supply lines much more, and that lengthened their maintenance time versus combat time much more than the people of Chad um, did, and so the Chad crushed the Gunt.
So like one of the things, and this is kind of a general, to be slightly fair to the Libyans, this is an issue since we had the creation of shaped charges and that kind of thing. Like
Yeah,
during I think it was World War II, the British destroyed a bunch of the Italian fleet at Taranto, and they were using
yeah,
like primitive World War One biplanes, but they had modern torpedoes, and
yeah,
torpedoes will go through battleships like a knife through butter. So it's to a certain extent it's probably the same thing where really cheap anti-tank weapons will go through tanks. Now, there are ways of dealing with this. Um,
Yeah,
Theoretically, you should have infantry and like machine gun pulse.
supporting your tanks. Yes,
Like,
yes,
because I'm
exactly.
sure like heavy machine, like 50 cal machine guns could probably destroy the Toyotas pretty quick, even if they have a bit of
Yeah,
armor on them. But
yeah,
they don't like they can't do combined arms. So like if the Libyan tanks had infantry support, they still should have been
yes.
able to just blow them out.
Did the Libyans have BMPs? See.
Yes. One of the
Oh
big
wow.
issues is they don't seem to train them to use. They don't seem to do accuracy or marksmanship training. So,
Uh-huh.
like during the Lebanese civil war, there was a during the Syrian versus Israeli phase. The basically the Syrians realized that their population was completely retarded and incompetent, so they just massively expanded the commando corps. So the commandos would be in like an ideal position. They'd be like on a hill behind rocks, and the Israeli tanks would be coming down a narrow path, and they'd pop up with their anti tank guns, like at point
Yeah.
blank range, and then they just miss. Like they just miss with all their RPGs and anti tank guns, and it's like a perfect ambush. You just had to point and shoot, and they were just incapable of doing it. And their
Oh
tanks
wow.
and artillery and aircraft just have very very poor aim. Um,
Hmm.
so
There are stories, right, of of FN files from retrieved from ANC guerrillas that had like the dial all the way up.
mhm.
Like they had their
Yeah, they put the sights up to max because they
yeah,
thought that increased the
yeah,
power of the gun.
based in Redfield.
Um,
Oh man,
it's
so
like a
awesome.
mind over matter thing.
Based.
But like, so here's the thing. Why are Africans, and once again, like it talks about the Angola War in the book, and the Cubans did
Yeah,
all this stuff with the tanks and aircraft and artillery, and they were very good at it. But
yeah.
UNITA was no, not UNITA. The MPLA was good at infantry combat. Like their troops fought well. Um,
Mm.
so is it just that I'm just trying to think like why is it because the thing that really stands out to me is just
What's the name of the book that you
armies
were
of
reading?
sand.
Armies of the Sun.
It is
Okay,
made
yeah.
by like a
Go on.
Jewish neocon. I'm just gonna. That doesn't mean like the historical debt. Nothing like it says historically though is goes against anything
Yeah,
else I've read.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
you can tell there's parts where they, but it's not particularly bad for that.
Way,
Um,
way.
the big issue though that kind of constantly amazes me is how passive the Arabs are. So like they'll
Yeah.
roll up, they'll take a position, they'll dig in, and they won't counterattack, they won't maneuver, they won't even shoot back a lot of the time.
We saw that like nearly all the time during the coalition offensive in 1991 in in Iraq. They just wouldn't do they just wouldn't hit back. Like they had their T-72s in hull down position, right?
Were T-70 how are T-72s good or
Um, depends on how you use them because with upgrades the
okay? Let me
T-72.
let me rephrase that. They were capable of doing something
Oh, they were capable of
because they did
doing
nothing.
a lot of damage. Like like at the very least they could have taken out they could have taken like the T-72 is it moves pretty fast. Okay, it's pretty fast tank. It has a low silhouette. The main gun, the tank gun, is it like 120 millimeters, I think.
125
Um,
smoothbore.
yeah, 125 smoothbore, and it's it's a pretty it's a pretty effective it's a pretty effective tank for the time, and it's in use. So it forms the backbone of the Indian Army Tank Corps. So India has like nearly 3,000 of them in active service.
Right.
I mean, they've been heavily upgraded, of course, but
Uh,
even so, they're a pretty effective tank. Now they
well,
should have
keep
been
in mind
able
this
to
was
take out
1992, so this was a while back.
ago. Yes, yes. Like the French had the AMX 30, I think. The British had the Challenger,
Hmm.
and the Americans had the M1A1, not the M1A2 Abrams tank. So they should have been able to do at least some
They should have
damage,
been
right? I
able to
mean,
destroy the like Bradleys and infantry fighting vehicles and
yes, 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 yes. And surprise, surprise, the Iraqis did do a fuck ton of damage to the Iranians, right? During the Iran-Iraq war,
the
right?
last phase of it.
Yeah. However, b- b- against the coalition, like they literally did nothing. Like, I mean,
Because I feel like if they had have just drove all their tanks at the coalition and just fired all their ammo, they would have done significantly better. Because they literally just did not like it's. And people go, "Oh, it was America. It was they were outgunned." But like the
they were
Vietnamese were outgunned, and they still
the
like put up a fight.
American. I mean, the Vietnamese, like people often forget this, but the North Vietnamese, the NVA, not the Viet Cong per se,
Mhm.
the NVA had tanks, and they used those tanks to pretty good effect um, after the Tet Offensive. So late 1968, early 1969,
No, but
and
I mean, like
through
the Americans
mostly
had
71.
probably as big
They
a
did.
firepower advantage.
They had like PT. They had like PT 76 tanks. They're like amphibious light tanks.
No,
was like
I'm
nearly
just
20
saying
years
in
old.
terms of the relative
Uh-huh.
firepower, the Iraqis had a much closer amount of firepower than
Yes.
the North
Yeah.
Vietnamese did. And the North
Yes.
Vietnamese were able to like do something. Whereas the Iraqis,
Yes.
like I'm looking at
Yes.
this, the coalition lost 300 versus like 30,000 Iraqis.
Yeah. That's like, oh wow, that's
And the
like kill
coalition
to death
lost
ratio of like
30
100.
tanks versus 3,300.
See, there you go. That's a
So
fuck
it's
ton of.
like, once again, now Sirp made the point when in his video on this that if like so the coalition took a couple months to gather its forces, right?
They took about 4 to 6 months.
So he's
The
like, they should have just gone YOLO and invaded Saudi Arabia. Like, why not at that point?
the Saudis would have been able to do absolutely fucking nothing. Nothing. They just would have rolled over. They just would have
Once again, it
rolled
would have they
over and
would have been
taken it. They
able to
didn't.
do more than they did. I'm not sure if they could reach where the coalition was building up, but they could have like tried attacking
Um,
that.
King Khalid military city isn't really all that far from the border. Like,
Oh, let me
yeah, let's
see
see.
here.
King Khalid military city.
I mean, once again, I mean the Americans probably would have like done a lot of, but like when we're talking about how poorly they did, anything would have been better. So,
Exactly, yeah. I mean, how the fuck do you miss with your fucking scuds, man? Just shoot something, like hit
so
something for
you
fuck's sake.
said that their aircraft were actually pretty good.
Yes, they were actually pretty decent. Yes, they had. So by the end
Okay, I'm
of the
looking at it. It's
Iran-Iraq
it's
war, right?
really close to Kuwait. Let me see how
Yeah,
close it is to Kuwait.
yeah, maybe like. So it's in the eastern province, I think. And going off memory here, so I'd say about about 70 miles ish, I think.
Uh, I'll have to look this up. But it's let's see, Kuwait City to. And I know, like, also just during the various, um, okay, from Kuwait City it's 300 kilometers, but from the
Okay.
border, I think it's. Let me just see. There's a city at the Kuwaiti border. Uh,
So from highway, so on highway 50, I think. So from Ar Rukiye.
to the border, it's about 200 kilometers.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's not far at all. It's yeah, it's actually pretty close. It's not far.
So, I mean, if they had have just YOLO'd it, that would have worked better. And this is kind of just a trait you see, I find kind of throughout the various offensives. Like, to me, one of the most excusably bad ones was the Six-Day War, where if the Arabs had have all just attacked at the same time, they would have won. But they, like, did this
Yes,
bizarre thing where they, like,
where they sent in their troops piecemeal, and
because I think
that
it was
just
like
basically,
Egypt, then 2 days later it was Jordan, then 2 days later it was Syria. And the
yeah.
numerical advantage was such that, like, they should have just been able, like, by charging to have won. Like, with no
Um,
strategy.
I think
Or maybe not quite. No,
so.
it's pretty.
So the Egyptians lost, well, like they lost the majority of their I- aircraft
Yeah, in the first
when
day.
the yeah, uh they lost all their bombers. They lost like over for like
Also, a lot of their airfields were
like
just rendered
75%.
inoperable, and they were too
Yeah,
incompetent
they
to
had they
repair
had
them.
the no, they couldn't repair it in a very short time because the Israelis used the Durandal anti-runway bombs. So these had bomblets that would burrow deep into the tarmac and then explode,
Oh, okay.
and that would cause a lot of craters. Yeah, they just yeah they just couldn't. They just couldn't.
Um, but like once again, I think the at least I think during this war they had a didn't they have like Soviet air anti-air missile systems and stuff?
The Egyptians,
Yeah.
yeah, they had SA2 guidelines, I think.
Um, because I
You
can't
know
re-
what's funny?
I can't. Yeah.
You know what's funny? What's funny is that the Syrians were so on the Golan Heights in 1967, the Syrians were deploying Panzer IV tanks and some Tug 3 tank destroyers. That's so base that they would have
Well, I mean, the Israelis still had Shermans. They
national
just
national
upgraded
national
the
socialist.
they
They
just
had
upgraded the guns
it's
on them.
so fucking awesome that the Syrians of all people would have National Socialist tanks fighting the Israelis based in Red
Well, I
Cliff.
mean, Baathism is literally Arab fascism. But it was kind of funny because prior to the Iran Iraq war, Iraq
Hmm.
launched, they tried to replicate the preemptive airstrike, and I think they blew up
Yeah,
like two or three Iranian planes. And they
yeah,
just completely fucked it up. Like,
yes.
they might have lost more planes just from bad flying than they destroyed.
Yeah, it's just it's
So were the
so
Iranians a
depressing when you
lot more
think about it.
competent in general?
The Iranians appear to have fought in a far more competent manner because the because at that because at that time, right, like so by like 1984 85, the Iranian air force was down to about like 40 or 50
I'm
planes
just bringing it up
from.
so we can look at this.
Yeah,
Strength at the start of the war, Iraq. No, Iran had about 205 operational planes versus 200 for Iraq.
yeah. So by the middle of the war, they had the Iranians were down to like
I would imagine that
40 or 50.
the Iraqi planes were a lot more modern.
Not, not really. They were more or less equivalent,
Oh, okay.
because the Iranians had made a lot of purchases, um, when the Shah of Iran was in power. So they had negotiated like 80 F-14 Tomcats, a bunch of Phantoms, bunch of Tigers.
Were those state
So,
of the
so
art at the time?
at at the time the F-14 was very state of the art. So yeah, I mean the Americans used the Tomcat until like 2006, I think. The F-5 and the F-4 are still in use, with several powers. Even I think I think
Oh,
I
okay.
think
You
I,
know
I
what? I hadn't realized. Okay, so the Iranian Revolution, I thought it happened earlier. Okay, so this was
no, it
literally a
happened in
year.
79.
So this was literally a
Yeah,
year after. Okay, so all the equipment's
yeah,
completely
yeah,
new at this point.
yeah, yeah,
Um, the
yeah.
Iraqis still outnumbered them, 2 to 1.
Iraq is still outnumbered them, yes. But the Iranians, like throughout all their operations, I mean, like early on in the war, right? The Iranians launched an airstrike that destroyed the nuclear power plant that they had uh, been building, and was like half built. So yeah.
I think pretty consistently they were known for having good pilots. The Iranians were.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, that's right. Um, I mean it was what's it called? Operation Pearl, I think. It was in like it was towards the end, so late November of 1980. Again, I'm going off of memory. Um, the Iranians launched Operation Pearl, which basically took out like the vast majority of Iraqi shipping. Their their Iraqi navy was BTFO'd, like totally blown the fuck out, and
Right.
um and which meant that when the Iraqis wanted to conquer the southern city of Abadan, which is um which is finally enough. So it is in the Khuzestan province, and Khuzestan is funny because Khuzestan means the land of towers. So yeah, so it's like so it's so it's it's on the Persian Gulf. So when they tried to conquer the city of Abadan, the Iraqis were not able to blockade the port of Abadan, which allowed the Iranians to keep on resupplying the city by sea. So, um, yeah. So, I mean, by the, by the end of the first year,
Yeah, in the
Iraq.
first year of the war, I'm looking it up. The Iranians launched Operation Moravid, Morverid, which destroyed 80% of the Iraqi navy in one battle.
See, there you go. Oh, yeah. See,
Um, which I think it also destroyed all of their oil rigs in the Persian Gulf. And
yeah,
beat up their ports pretty bad. So I
yeah,
think pretty early, I think in the early war, the Iraqis were able to. No, the Iranians actually, I think, had air superiority for quite a bit of the war. Um,
yes,
Even when the Iraqis, because I think it was described as the Iraqis would just like fly in a straight line and not attempt to do any evasive maneuvers, and the Iranian
yeah,
pilots would just
yeah,
destroy them. I think it said the only
yeah,
times the Iraqis would win is if it was like 4-on-1.
yeah. Um, b- but like, I don't know. I don't know how true that is because this was in the beginning of 1981. The Iranians launched Operation Nasser, um, which was around the city of Isful. So Abidis, um,
Was that the biggest
which
Iraqi
was
victory of the early war?
yeah. So it was in southwest Iran. The Iranians had about like two divisions worth, so about like
I think
300.
they had most of their tanks in that one battle.
So the Iranians had like so uh, according to this Orbat that I'm looking at, they had um chieftain tanks and M60s, and the Iraqis had T-72s and T-62s. They had about 350 to the Iranians 330 tanks, and it was a super decisive. Was a super decisive Iraqi victory. So the Iranians lost about over 200 of their tanks,
Oh, okay, so I'm
and
looking at another one.
lost,
So
yeah,
the H-3 airstrike um, was where the Iranians destroyed 50 Iraqi aircraft with no losses in one air raid.
yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, they were 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 very
Because
competent
I
at
remember when
this.
I was just like reading the listening to the book, they kept like it seemed like the Iraqi army was almost entirely mechanized or motorized. uh
Yes.
they didn't even seem to have many like leg infantry divisions, whereas the Iranian army seemed to.
Um, th- that's
Okay, I'm
that's
exaggerating, but they had a pretty
yeah,
large
because
mechanized force.
saying that because yes, they did have a pretty significant mechanized component, and they tended to follow Soviet deep battle doctrine,
Hmm.
right? But they never really were able to follow up and exploit the breakages in the Iranian line. This happened time and again they would win tactical victories, right? But then they would just lose steam and just not do it. They wouldn't be able to
Not press
exploit the
the
gaps.
advantage despite having like mobile forces. Like they
Yeah, which is surprising. Just surprising because the Iranians, despite lacking heavy weapons from for for a few years, um, after they lost most of their tanks during Operation Nasser, um, the Iraqi quote no, the Iranian quote human wave unquote attacks, right? They managed to exploit the most weakly defended portions of the Iraqi lines. So they were the lines that were manned by the Iraqi Popular Army, which was the conscript part, the non-elite part of the Iraqi military, and they would they would break those lines using infiltration and high human resource intensive um, um, human
I
wave
think
assaults.
part of
It's
the issue
something
is
that
because the Iraqis didn't use combined arms. The Iranian infantry were just able to get in close and use anti tank weapons on them.
um that's true. That's true. However, um that's true, but I think more importantly, what the Iraqis did was that they settled. They were very quick to settle into static defensive positions.
With a
That was
mechanized army.
with a mechanized army. So you would think that they would utilize their ability to move, but they're fucking retards,
Because
so
if you're
they
gonna
don't.
sneak it, because to my mind, if you're gonna sneak attack Iran with a mechanized army, you should set your goals like really ambitious and really deep in Iranian territory, and just
Yes,
just go and just blow through as much as you can. Like one of the
yeah,
things they said in the book was Iraq didn't occupy or garrison any of the cities they captured.
yes.
So once
They did not. This was so. So this was another pretty big problem even in Kuwait, right? So the Iraqi Popular Army, which made up the bulk of the Iraqi land forces, and the elite Republican Guard, they didn't get along very well. So when they invaded Kuwait, the Iraqi Popular Army was given the garrison duty. So they occupied Kuwait, but they were far away from home. Most of these guys were just farmer folk, right?
right.
They just wanted to get back home, and now what happened as a result was that the Americans and the British, they just sent in a lot of Pathfinder Regiment SEALs and SAS, special forces, and they played a hell with Iraqi morale by teaching local resistance forces in Kuwait to use Semtex or C4, and so the grasp that Saddam Hussein had on Kuwait was never very strong because the garrison forces weren't very strong. They were very poorly motivated, and the Republican Guard, it didn't really want to be involved. They couldn't be Saddam couldn't afford to send them to garrison a city, so he sent his internal spy uh, um um service, his secret service, the Mukhbarat, which is funny because the word news in Arabic, akhbar, that it it shares the same root as spy, the Mukhbarat,
I
which
always
is
thought that that was a
spying
badass
organization.
name for a spy
Yeah,
organization.
yeah, but no, akhbar, right? Akhbar is the Urdu word for news and also for newspaper. It's that it shares the same root as a spy. The Mughal spy system was called the Akhbar in news.
Hmm.
So they were called the Akhbar. So yeah, it's intelligence and news. They often had similar roots. Anyway, to get back to the point, um, uh, now when the majority of your army is not motivated, like what are you supposed to do, right?
Hmm.
So that's so yeah, so that was a pretty big problem. That was a pretty massive problem back in that time.
Um, so like what the book said was that um, early on during the war, uh, the Iraqi general staff was really poor. He
Yeah,
actually stated that towards the end of the war, the Iraqi general staff actually was quite competent. They just their field commanders were completely incapable of doing the most basic stuff or showing any initiative.
yeah,
So after they got ejected from Iran, which once again, I mean, if we look at this was a mostly conventional war. I don't even think this was an asymmetric war. Wasn't a lot of it just straight out like um,
it
battles?
was just two large armies smashing into each other.
So it's not
That's
as
just
if like
yeah.
those are the scenarios where tanks are
They
good,
use a
right?
lot of poison gas. They use a lot of the Iraqis did use a lot of taboon and sarin. So yeah,
No, I'm
they
just
use a lot of
saying
poison
like
gas. But aside from that, it's yeah, just
um, but even that is kind of like World War One ish. Like with in comparison to something like Chad, where it was asymmetric warfare or something.
yeah, yeah,
And you would
yes,
think in this context, having an advantage in tanks and artillery would be really, really important because that's when you can use
yeah,
tanks. Like, it's hard to use
yes,
tanks against people ambushing you with RPGs and stuff. But,
yeah,
like, and they were incapable of doing it. So,
yes,
at the end of the war, he said more or less what they did was the general staff literally just wrote like these ultra detailed plans that I think he said they had like flow charts in them. There was like if the enemy does this, then you do this in response, and
yeah.
stuff like that. And then they had them rehearse for months, and then they like limited the operations to 48 hours because they weren't smart enough to do it for longer than that. And it's just
I
like,
think
yeah.
I think one of the so one of the problems, again, this is a huge systemic issue with Arab military effectiveness, and you saw this in um in what Saddam did, and we keep on seeing this now in the Saudi military, most of all, right? Is
Mhm.
that their tribal system, it does make its presence felt in the when it comes to military not just deployments, but appointments. Now, one of the things that Saddam did was that he replaced um, his the pre-existent cabinet and his military high command with people from his tribe and his village, so which would be Tikrit.
Hmm.
So that's what Saddam did. Now, tribal nepotism of this magnitude, right?
Hmm.
Um, that just yeah, you don't you don't get good you don't get good returns from that. You just don't get good returns from that.
Although at the same time, I'm somewhat sympathetic. So that was one of the points he raises was the politicization of the armed forces. But given
Yeah.
how often these people get overthrown in military coups, um,
Yeah.
I can't really blame them to a certain extent for being hyper concerned with having politically reliable people. They do
Oh,
take it to like a
yeah.
absurd degree, though.
Oh, I'm not blaming them. I'm just
No,
saying
I'm
it.
just saying it
I'm
is
just
an
saying it
issue
like it
with
is.
them not using
Yeah.
professional soldiers.
Yeah. But yeah, I just find it super impressive that in 1967 the uh, Syrians and the Jordanians were using German tanks against Israelis. That's so awesome. So
So,
based.
one of the interesting things, so I'm looking at the last offensives of the war. So, the Iraqis managed to BTFO the Iranians. So, the Iranians had 100,000, sorry, 300,000 soldiers to Iraqis, 1.5 million,
Yeah.
400 tanks to Iraqis, 5,500, and 50 aircraft to Iraq's 900. And that plus months of preparation is what it took for Iraq to like win a limited victory.
Yes.
It's
The
just kind of
you were talking about like Karbala 7 and 8, right?
yeah.
Karbala, or was it Karbala 9?
Hmm.
Yeah. So was it oh wow. Um I just don't get why the Americans just kept on hitting the Iranians
The Persian Gulf.
in 1980. Yeah, was is part of the tanker war. Um, when it was both the Iranians and the Iraqis. So I'm talking in particular about Operation Nimble Archer, where um, the U.S. Navy just destroyed, think, the some Iranian offshore um, oil platforms.
Right.
Oh, what's actually interesting is that the Arabs just kept on giving money and sending volunteers to to Iraq because they were afraid of what they called Persian extremism. The Arab fears the Aryan. That's yeah.
Well, I mean, given like how they performed, I mean, and
Yeah, they
isn't this like something we're having? So maybe just to move to something more recent, that's kind of a thing we have in oh, what's it called again? Yemen, where like the Saudis are just getting their asses kicked.
the Saudis are totally getting their asses kicked. Yeah.
And
Um.
it's like it's inexcusable given how bad like how
Yes.
over let's look at what it is. So I'm not sure if, who's actually winning at this point in time, or if it's just a stalemate. But
And probably no one. It's just yeah.
the Iraqi, okay, so the I'm just trying to see here. So Saudi Arabia has sent in 150,000 soldiers. The Houthis, I think, only have like 150,000. So there's just like they have a massive numerical and technological advantage, but they're just completely incapable of doing anything with it.
Yeah, they're just really bad at fighting. I don't know why. You know what? Maybe you know what? Maybe what's actually going on is that they spend all their energy on handling their MENA baddies, so they don't have any leftover to fight wars.
Sorry, what is that?
I'm saying they spend all their energy just keeping their MENA baddies under control, so
Right.
they don't have any. Yeah, so they don't have any leftover to fight um,
Hmm.
the Jews or each other or Hezbollah or whatever.
Yeah, that's probably true. But no, they're just doing so unbelievably bad. It's kind of fascinating, really. Um,
It's kind of embarrassing, yeah.
but I don't know. It's she has just seemed to generally be better. Um, Although no, that's not true. I don't think the Syrian armies did really that well. Um,
Um, uh, better than that's better than what the other people did, but yeah,
because I feel like they should have really been able to win the civil. And I get part of what happened as time went on is America just kept throwing more and more money and weapons and shit at them, and that made things
yeah,
very difficult. But at the same time,
yeah,
early in the war, I think they should have performed better,
yes,
given how big their advantage was.
yeah, it's true. That's true.
Um, so I think that covers most of it.
Yeah.
Now, talking about this, let me see what's going on in Afghanistan.
Oh God,
If India wasn't part of the coalition, was it?
no,
Okay, here we go. Okay,
because
so I'm not sure if you're looking at the video, but I pulled up what the map looks like at the moment, and
um
it's just a joke. Like it's oh fuck. But I think they've lost like pretty much virtually all of it at this point. Let me see. I think the only territories that they have left under their control are the capital and a couple of the major cities. I think a lot of the cities are now under.
this is so this is so depressing, man.
I don't really know how to
All
feel.
that for fucking nothing. All of that for nothing.
Um,
What a
well,
waste.
because it went on for like it was thousands of American lives, well, and other Western lives. Um, I think it was hundreds of billions of dollars. Like I can only imagine the kind of shit that they could have done, even if they just gave it to people as tax cuts versus
Yeah.
just wasting it on like
And so many movies. So many movies. Like imagine yeah, just we had the Hurt Locker, we had Snipe, we had American Sniper, we had the
those were
other
Iraq.
yeah, but it's part of the same thing, right?
Hmm.
It's so disappointing. God damn it.
Um, so was India involved at
What an
all
absolute joke.
during
Uh Not really, because Because the thing is, like, we have Pakistan, and we have a pretty big Muslim population to think of. Like, things like this, you can very easily construe it as being an anti-Muslim action. And
Right.
India's military and counterinsurgency forces could be deployed um to um hunt down and kill Muslims in India. Like, why would you have to go why would you have to go to um
Right.
yeah, you know what I mean, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Anyways, I think that mostly covers what I wanted to go over. It was just a massive fucking shit show.
Yeah.
So, have you started your YouTube channel yet, or is that something you're working on getting going?
I, I'm just busy with my work now, and I'm just waiting for that to be
What
done
a
because
cock! Prioritizing
thank you.
IRL stuff instead of
Thank you.
like LARPing on the internet.
Based in red build.
Anyways, thanks for coming on, man. I appreciate it.
Sure.
So, hope everybody enjoyed that stream. God bless. Lots of exciting